Welcome to the Imperfect Moms Club.
Well, Hi, Lisa. I'm so happy to be here. Yes, we've kind of had this scheduled for a little while, and it's fun to finally get together.
And I'm excited to talk about grief with you, about kids. So before we get into all that, if you could just kind of introduce yourself and tell us, who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm Michele Benyo, and I'm the founder of Good Grief Parenting. And my background is as an early childhood parent educator. I became a parent educator in my mid-30s when I became a mom. I had some teaching and some communications and other careers in my background, but I just loved being a mom. And by the time I started doing my work as an early childhood parent educator, which is a program early childhood family education is a program we have here in Minnesota in every school district. And it just gave me a chance to be with parents of other young children like mine every day and, just navigate together parenting in those early years. And so I just loved that path. I loved that occupation. But just a few months after starting that, my 4.5-year-old son was actually diagnosed with cancer. I had a 15-month-old daughter as well. And so it kind of launched me on a very different early childhood parenting experience. And after 2.5 years, my son did die of cancer, and his sister was
so sorry.
Yes, it was not how I planned for my early childhood career to go, but with the loss of her brother, my daughter actually said to me at the age of 3.5, "Mommy, half of me is gone." So it just really was something that I was so deeply aware of from the beginning, was this idea of how young children grieve so deeply. And that's been my mission now with Good Grief Parenting for the last more than 20 years. And so that's what brought me to you today, is just all of the things I've learned that most of us as adults don't even really think about, which is how those really little ones grieve.
There's stages of grief for adults. I talk about the stages of grief, but how does it differ with children? Is there a difference in the different stages?
Well, I really want to debunk that idea of stages, because that's really a misused concept. It is so common, Lisa, everyone talks about it. In fact, when my son died and I had to face this grief, I didn't know anything about grief. And I had this little child who clearly was grieving with me and had a husband who was grieving, and I didn't know how to do it or how to be in others with it. And people talked to me about the stages of grief, which I had never heard about before. And I didn't do any of that. And so I actually felt like, oh my gosh, I'm doing grief wrong. How can I help my daughter? I'm not doing this right. Well, I have since learned that those things that we call the stages of grief actually never were the stages of grief. They're the stages of dying. And they were identified by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross when she was working with and studying adults who they themselves have had a diagnosis of impending death, a fatal diagnosis. And so it's the stages. It's intended to be what people might experience when they learn that they themselves are dying. And that made more sense to me.
Oh, okay.
But many people, including psychologists and people who, work with people who are grieving, talk about these stages. And I just really want your listeners to understand that these are not stages of grief, even though they're used that way. And grief doesn't really go through stages. It can be it's more of a process that you go through, and you circle back through some of those emotions. And certainly many of those emotions can be parts of it. As for children, which was your question, they experience grief in many ways as adults do. They experience the absence of Well, I deal with the loss of a loved one and specifically the death of a sibling or a child. But of course, there are many other losses that children experience, and some of them aren't even, the death of a loved one. It might be divorce that causes them to lose the family they knew and maybe less of a relationship with one parent, loss of a pet. Moving away, like in the movie Inside Out, where Riley is grieving her familiar neighborhood, that's all grief. And the way that kids experience it, because they don't have the words and they don't have the past experience, it really was pretty amazing that my 3.5-year-old daughter could state it the way she did, that half of her was gone. Because she hadn't had grief experiences before. She was just telling me how it felt to her. And often kids don't have the vocabulary or the experience. And so you're going to see their grief in ways that may not look like grief. They may be, more irritable, or they may be very, very quiet and fearful. Many kids, like my daughter, work through their grief through play. So sometimes adults will say, well, I don't think they're really, feeling the loss. They seem to be doing okay. They're just playing. Well, play is how children process a lot of hard things and confusing things that happen to them. And so with children, rather than looking for signs that they're grieving, I just encourage people to know that if your family has experienced a really significant loss, it is affecting your child and they are grieving. If there was someone in the household that is now gone, they know that person is gone. They miss that presence, and they may not, be crying a lot. My daughter didn't cry. That wasn't something she did a lot of. She really worked it all through with her play. So that's the main difference, is that it's not as visible. Many of the feelings are the same, but kids don't know how to articulate them, and they don't really understand what those feelings are the way we do as adults, because we have more experience.
That is really incredible. She was able to articulate it in that way. My husband and I actually, before I came upstairs, we were talking about how we have a 3.5-year-old now, and she, my family's French, and so one day I had her watching a French show, and then she told me she wanted to watch it in English, but she didn't know how to say, like, oh, I want to watch it in English, so she said, I want to watch it in ABCs. So it's just kind of like, it's funny how kids really find different ways of, but they still get their point across. They can still they can still make you feel what they feel. Just that's amazing that she was able to, and that she felt safe enough to, safe with you, safe enough to share that with you. That's great too. About a year ago now, so we had to put my cat down. So my daughter she was only 2.5, and it was just supposed to be a routine follow-up visit, and we ended up I had to put down my cat. And so I came home, without Noodle. And my husband and I didn't really know how to bring it up to Lily. We were going to just, I told him, I said, let's just wait until she brings it up. Like if she wonders, oh, where's Noodle or whatever, then we can have a talk with her. But I don't want to force anything on her right now, like she's having fun, she's playing. I don't want to be like, oh, hey, guess what? Right. Yeah. So we waited. And I noticed actually in like the next few weeks after that, she didn't appear sad, but she liked to pretend to be a cat for a while. And so I recognized that as that's how she was coping with it, she became a cat herself. And so she would meow at me, and I would call her Kitty Lily, because I recognized that she was processing it, and she still, she didn't really understand the concept of she's not coming back. Right. I think she was still a little too young to understand that. But we told her, she was very sick and she wasn't going to get better. And so, but I thought it was interesting how she she just was, all of a sudden she decided she wanted to pretend to be a cat one day.
Mm-hmm,
And I was like,
mm-hmm.
oh, okay, so I just went with it because that's what she needed in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. And
but yeah, it's interesting.
they do find their ways, and that just brings up a couple of things. And one is that sometimes when they ask us things or they say things around the circumstance that's created the grief, we may sort of assume that we know what they're wanting to know, or we may think that we know how they're processing it. And it's just important to know that they're doing their own thing. They're like the ABC's comment that you made was kind of what brought this to mind for me, is that that's a very literal description of what's different about the two shows. And she really tapped into that, but you needed to understand that that's what she was referring to. And when children talk to us about grief or other things that they're experiencing, if we don't understand what they're asking or referring to, it's important to ask them for, what do you mean by that? Or why are you asking me that? Or why are you saying this? With the kitty cat being a cat thing, it was just really so clear that was what she was doing. And one other thing that you bring up is just that idea of how we tell them that someone or the beloved pet has died. And we do need to keep reinforcing for them that the fact that they died, and I really recommend using that word, because it's the only word that accurately tells children what happened. They don't understand what death is. They're not going to understand it really till they're 5 or 6, what death is. But we still have the opportunity to start teaching them about it and saying, death is when your body stops working. What was the cat's name? Did you tell me?
Noodle.
Yes. Noodle's body stopped working, and she can't meow anymore. She can't jump on your bed anymore. She can't play with you anymore, and we're not going to see her anymore. She died. Her body stopped working. They're going to have to process that. They're going to ask you about it as they grow cognitively through, as they grow up as a child. They're going to have more understanding of that and probably want to talk about it some more. And we're going to just have to keep reminding them. And then, the idea of someone being sick, which you mentioned, we always kind of aren't sure about that either, because we want them to know that someone's body stops working only sometimes when they're very, very sick. So we can be sick and our body will keep working. And, many times that's the case. But so we just really keep reminding them of what died means, and letting them get used to the idea that they're not going to see this person again. They'll ask us over and over again, and we'll just have to keep telling them.
Yeah, we noticed that. My husband and I noticed that about Lily, is she would keep asking kind of the same questions. And, we would tell her, like, so Noodle she was very sick and she wasn't going to get better. And we were, I looked up online because I didn't know, I didn't think that Lily we'd have to deal with this early, I guess, in Lily's life. But, so I looked it up, and I remember reading that to be direct. So we said died, we said not coming back, because I was thinking about it, and had we said, oh, she's just not here anymore, then that would have for her meant, oh, well, she might come back later or something. So I wanted to be very clear that she won't be coming back. It's hard to know what language to use, because you don't want to be too dark and sad and depressing, but you also want to make sure you get the point across. So it's hard for me, because I like to be gentle, and I don't, so it was hard for me. I didn't really know, but especially because it was such a surprise, I guess. she expected, I mean, everybody expected to me to come back with Noodle.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of like brought up and, hey, you should do this. And so I was like, okay. So I didn't have time to process it myself before being home and being with Lily. And so we kind of had to process it together. Like, I feel like I processed it through helping her process it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, that kind of, I guess it was helpful for me too, to be able to explain it in layman's terms for her, but then also it kind of helped me as well.
You touched on something so important, and that is that we as adults are uncomfortable with death. A child isn't uncomfortable with death. They haven't had the experience we have. So when we can't, I mean, it was awful for me to have to say, my son died. I didn't want to use that word to talk about what happened to him. I had 2.5 years to prepare for that inevitability. But just that language for us as adults, we know what it means. We know the finality. Mm-hmm. We know the pain that comes with the absence of this person or this pet that we loved. All of that for us is contained in that very direct language of death. It's not the same for a child. They don't have all of that. So what we're really giving them is vocabulary that's going to prevent the confusion you talked about that comes from us sometimes wanting to be more. We think we're being gentle, but we're really just not being direct and giving them accurate information. And it can create problems later. So yeah, the way you described your experience with just having to figure all of that out is what we have to go through as adults. We really have to deal with our own coping with it before we can even bring it to a child. And that really can make it hard. But yeah, being direct is so important and simple, let her ask more questions. They'll ask more questions later, but for now what you told her is just the basics, and the truth and direct, and that's what she needed. So absolutely.
Yeah, I think we handled it well.
I do too.
Yeah, she's finally, I think now she's done with like asking again and again. But of course I know that, grief comes and goes, and they say grief is an ocean. And so like I'm ready though now for like the next time she comes to me with it. I won't be as like, oh, I don't know what to, like I'll, I can't imagine what you were going through while you're also trying to like, shepherd your daughter through it. I mean, how is that? If you don't mind me asking.
That is the challenge. And the word that always comes to mind for me with adults and grief is that it's intimidating. We don't know how to do any of it, and we're so afraid of doing it wrong. And with children, in addition to being direct with what we tell them, the other thing is to go through it with them. We don't need to protect kids from pain, from our own pain or their pain. Right. And I think we feel like we need to, like we have to protect them somehow. And that means I can't be sad. With me, Deanna and I were both deeply grieving and missing this person. And, Dad was too. We were all in this grief together. And one of the best things that I learned in that situation from the grief support group in the hospital that we attended was just the idea of letting your child know your grief. And just again, being direct, I'm really missing David today. I'm missing, one time I said to my daughter, she saw me being really sad, and I said, I'm just really missing David today. And my belief is that we're going to see David again. I'm a Christian. I believe I know where he is and that I'm going to see him there. I also believe that his spirit is a presence with us in a way. And so I was saying to her, I miss that he's not here to give me hugs, because of course we would always feel like he was here with us in spirit. I miss that he's not here to give me a hug, that he's not physically here. And she said, oh, Mommy, he still hugs me. So she had her own experience with her brother of feeling that he was still able to hug her, but she knew my grief when I experienced it, what they learn when they see us having a grief that maybe they don't exactly share. You're being a role model for her about how grief can feel with someone that we're really close to. You're obviously sharing memories of her with her about your grandpa and just telling her about him. You're giving her that history and that legacy, and you're sharing with her that important relationship and how happy it made you and how his being dead is sad for you. These are all parts of what we're going to share with kids. And I say childhood is the best time to learn about grief. You didn't want Lily to learn about it quite as soon as she did when Noodle died, but she did, and they do. And then we help them with it, and she's able to watch you, and she's learning from all of this healthy ways, and you're teaching her really healthy ways to process grief and to live with it because it's part of our lives. And so for me, I just really did feel, because I didn't know how to do it, it was very good for me to go through this grief support group at the hospital and to learn that I shouldn't worry about my daughter seeing my grief. And that, so when I work with families, I just say, it isn't either or. It's important for you to take care of your own needs. That was an important part for me. At the same time, because I was in this field of early childhood, I think I was more focused on her needs than I would have been otherwise. And you can do both at the same time. And that's just what parents need to know. You don't need to put your own needs aside for your child, and you don't need to hide your grief from them. It's a family experience, and you're going to have your really bad days, and your child can deal with that. You can help them understand that, and they don't need to be protected from it. Obviously, and this is just the one caveat, obviously, if you are so utterly devastated that you have trouble functioning, that you have trouble, that you can't stop crying, that you're really, really broken, which certainly can be a possibility, that's the kind of grief where you really are going to want to get some professional support, and you are going to want to find ways to help your child be shielded from some of the worst of it. Because the other part of what they experience when we are grieving is a fear that, I don't know if mommy can take care of me anymore. She is, she's not able to make dinner. She's so sad. She cries. That's scary for a child. So they need our reassurance that we can still take care of them. Yes, I really am sad. And I really cried hard today, didn't I? That's because I was really sad, but I'm still here and I'm still able to take care of you. And we're gonna get through this. We're gonna feel better sometime, just not right now. So some of those kinds of assurances are important too.
I guess when I was a child, I was protected from a lot of stuff, but that means that I also didn't experience a lot of things. I didn't learn how to cope with my feelings and things like that. So it's definitely, I think it's really important to show our kids how to cope with stuff, and show our kids that sometimes it's hard, but it'll be okay, and everything will be okay.
If we're not exposed to any of this as a child, it's not doing us any favors, because we're not having opportunities to learn the reality of some of the challenges of life that we will face at some point, and we're not learning how to cope with it. Everything that I teach families, parents in good grief parenting to help children who are grieving is just good parenting for every single child, whether they've had a huge loss in their childhood or not. And you're absolutely right to help kids learn what emotions are, and that they are all a part of our existence as a human, and we can manage all of them, is so important. So yeah, I love that you are giving that to Lily and others who listen to your program, and that, you know, you're so aware of that, because that's really, as you say, that really is the whole key. And that again also addresses the fear of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. If we're just being honest about emotions with all of the good and the bad, we don't try to make kids feel better. That's another thing adults do, is we never want kids to feel bad.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know what? Sometimes you just feel bad, and it's okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to feel better. When we try to make kids feel better anytime they don't, we're not teaching them to be happy. We're teaching them that when they don't feel good, they need to put that feeling away and not acknowledge it and not deal with it, because the adults don't want to deal with it.